Question 1. When compiling the findings of an internal audit for an organization's information security management system, what is the most critical principle to adhere to when documenting nonconformities and opportunities for improvement to ensure the report effectively supports the ISM's continual improvement cycle as per ISO 27001:2013 standards? Option A. Document observations in a subjective manner, allowing for personal interpretation of findings to provide a broader perspective on potential risks, even if direct evidence is limited. Option B. Prioritize the inclusion of detailed technical recommendations for each identified nonconformity, outlining specific software patches or configuration changes required for immediate remediation. Option C. Focus on highlighting only the most severe nonconformities that pose an immediate threat to information security, omitting minor deviations or potential areas for enhancement to maintain a concise report. Option D. Ensure all documented nonconformities and opportunities for improvement are supported by objective evidence gathered during the audit and are clearly stated to facilitate targeted corrective actions and proactive enhancements. The correct answer is D. Ensure all documented nonconformities and opportunities for improvement are supported by objective evidence gathered during the audit and are clearly stated to facilitate targeted corrective actions and proactive enhancements. Explanation. The primary purpose of an internal audit report is to communicate the findings of the audit to relevant stakeholders, including management and those responsible for the area audited, according to ISO 27001:2013, specifically in Clause 9. 2. Internal audits are conducted to provide information on whether the information security management system conforms to the organization's requirements for the ISMs and the requirements of ISO 27001, and whether it is effectively implemented and maintained. The audit report should present a clear, concise, and objective summary of the audit results. This includes detailing any nonconformities identified, observations that could lead to improvement, and positive aspects of the ISMs. The report serves as a basis for corrective actions and continual improvement. It is crucial that the report is factual, supported by evidence gathered during the audit, and presented in a manner that facilitates understanding and decision-making. While recommendations for improvement are often included, the report's core function is to inform about the current state of conformity and effectiveness, rather than dictating specific solutions or operational changes. The focus remains on the ISM's performance against established criteria. Question 2. An internal auditor reviewing the Information Security Management System, ISMS, at a financial services firm discovers that the organization's information security policy has not undergone a formal review or update in over 2 years. Furthermore, during interviews with a cross-section of employees from different departments, it becomes apparent that a substantial number of personnel are not fully cognizant of the policy's core directives concerning data handling and acceptable use of information assets. Considering the dynamic nature of cyber threats and the evolving regulatory landscape, including mandates like the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, and local data privacy laws, what is the most significant deficiency identified by the auditor in relation to the ISM's policy? Option A. The auditor's failure to obtain a signed acknowledgement of the policy from every employee. Option B. The policy's lack of currency and insufficient employee awareness of its provisions. Option C. The policy's limited scope, which does not explicitly mention cloud security controls. Option D. The absence of a dedicated policy review committee with external cybersecurity expertise. The correct answer is B. The policy's lack of currency and insufficient employee awareness of its provisions. Explanation. The effectiveness of an information security policy is directly tied to its relevance and the degree to which it is understood and applied by personnel. ISO 27001:2013, specifically within clauses related to policy development and implementation e.g. Clause 5, 2 Management Commitment, Clause 7, 2 Competence, Clause 7, 3 Awareness, emphasizes that a policy must be communicated, understood, and adhered to by all relevant parties. Regular reviews, as mandated by Clause 10, 1 Improvement, are crucial to ensure the policy remains aligned with the organization's objectives, the evolving threat landscape, and any changes in legal or regulatory requirements, such as data protection laws like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, or national cybersecurity directives. When an internal audit identifies that a significant portion of staff are unfamiliar with key policy provisions, and that the policy itself has not been updated in over 2 years despite significant technological shifts and new regulatory obligations, it indicates a fundamental breakdown in both the implementation and review processes. The policy's lack of currency and employee awareness means it is not effectively supporting the Information Security Management System, ISMS. Therefore, the primary deficiency identified by the auditor is the policy's outdatedness and the resulting lack of awareness, which directly impacts its operational effectiveness and compliance posture. This points to a failure in the periodic review and communication mechanisms designed to maintain the policy's relevance and penetration throughout the organization. Question 3. Consider a scenario during an internal audit of a financial services firm where a specific identified risk related to the unauthorized disclosure of sensitive client data has a residual likelihood of 0, 4, and a residual impact of 3, resulting in a residual risk score of 1. 2. The firm's documented risk acceptance criteria stipulate that risks with a score of 1, 5 or below are considered acceptable if further mitigation is not cost-effective or operationally disruptive. The audit team has reviewed the proposed treatment plan for this risk, which involves implementing a highly complex and expensive data loss prevention system. However, the risk owner has provided a strong justification, supported by a cost-benefit analysis, that the implementation of this system would incur significant operational overhead and disproportionately high costs for a marginal reduction in an already acceptable risk level. Based on these findings, what is the most appropriate course of action for the internal auditor regarding this specific residual risk? Option A. Document the risk as accepted by management, provided the justification for non-treatment is recorded and aligned with the organization's risk acceptance criteria. Option B. Advise the organization to increase the impact rating of the risk to demonstrate the necessity of implementing the proposed controls. Option C. Suggest reducing the likelihood rating of the risk to 0, as the intention to treat is present, even if not fully implemented. Option D. Recommend the immediate implementation of the proposed data loss prevention system, irrespective of cost effectiveness, to achieve the lowest possible residual risk. The correct answer is A. Document the risk as accepted by management, provided the justification for non-treatment is recorded and aligned with the organization's risk acceptance criteria. Explanation. The core principle of risk treatment in ISO 27001:2013 is to select and implement appropriate controls to modify the identified risks. When considering the treatment of a residual risk that remains after initial controls have been applied, an internal auditor must evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of the proposed treatment options against the organization's risk acceptance criteria. If a risk treatment option, such as implementing a new technical control or modifying an existing process, is deemed too costly or complex to implement without significantly impacting business operations, and if the residual risk level is still within the organization's defined tolerance, then accepting the risk becomes a valid and documented decision. This acceptance must be formally recorded and justified, typically by a management representative with appropriate authority. The other options represent either a failure to adequately address the risk, reducing controls without justification, or an escalation of the risk treatment process without proper consideration of the residual risk level relative to the organization's appetite for risk. The scenario focuses on the decision-making process for residual risk, where acceptance is a legitimate outcome if the risk is within tolerance and further treatment is not cost-effective or feasible. Question 4. Following an internal audit of the Information Security Management System, ISMS, at Cygnus Solutions, a significant nonconformity was identified regarding the inconsistent application of security awareness training across different departments, impacting the organization's compliance with relevant data protection regulations like GDPR. Which of the following actions, stemming from the audit finding, best exemplifies the principle of continual improvement as defined in ISO 27001:2013, Clause 10? 2. Option A. Updating the ISMS documentation to reflect the current state of training delivery, assuming that the policy itself is adequate and departmental non-adherence is the sole issue. Option B. Developing and implementing a revised security awareness training module with mandatory attendance tracking and periodic refresher sessions, followed by a post-implementation review to confirm improved compliance metrics. Option C. Conducting a supplementary risk assessment focusing solely on the potential impact of non-compliance with data protection regulations, without addressing the training deficiency directly. Option D. Issuing a formal memorandum to all department heads reiterating the existing security awareness training policy and requesting them to ensure adherence. The correct answer is B. Developing and implementing a revised security awareness training module with mandatory attendance tracking and periodic refresher sessions, followed by a post-implementation review to confirm improved compliance metrics. Explanation: the core of continual improvement within an ISO 27001-2013 ISMS, as mandated by Clause 10. 2. Involves leveraging audit findings and corrective actions. When an internal audit identifies a nonconformity related to the effectiveness of a security control, such as inadequate access logging for critical systems, the process for continual improvement is triggered. The auditor's report, detailing the specific control deficiency and its potential impact, serves as a crucial input. The organization must then initiate a corrective action process. This process involves understanding the root cause of the nonconformity, determining and implementing corrective actions to prevent recurrence, and verifying the effectiveness of these actions. For instance, if the root cause of insufficient logging is a misconfiguration in a server's audit policy, the corrective action might be to update the policy and reconfigure the server. Subsequently, a follow-up audit or review would be necessary to confirm that the logging is now functioning as intended and that the identified risk has been mitigated. This iterative cycle of identifying, addressing, and verifying improvements is fundamental to the ISM's evolution and its ongoing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. The effectiveness of the ISMS is directly linked to the organization's ability to learn from its nonconformities and implement robust solutions that enhance its security posture over time, aligning with the PDCA, Plan Do Check Act, cycle inherent in the standard. Question 5. During an internal audit of the organization's information security management system, an auditor discovers that the procedure for onboarding new employees, which mandates the immediate disabling of temporary access credentials upon conversion to permanent status, has not been consistently applied. Evidence shows that for 3 out of 10 recently onboarded personnel, their temporary credentials remained active for an additional 48 hours after their permanent accounts were established, creating a potential security gap. The auditor has documented this as a nonconformity. Considering the ISO 27001-2013 requirements for handling nonconformities and corrective actions, what is the most appropriate immediate next step for the organization to take in response to this audit finding? Option A. Issue a formal warning to the IT personnel responsible for account management and schedule a review of their performance in 3 months. Option B. Classify the nonconformity as minor and monitor the situation to see if any security incidents arise from the extended credential access. Option C. Immediately update the onboarding procedure to reflect the actual practice of allowing a grace period for temporary credential deactivation. Option D. Investigate the root cause of the delay in disabling temporary credentials and implement corrective actions to prevent recurrence, ensuring verification of effectiveness. The correct answer is D. Investigate the root cause of the delay in disabling temporary credentials and implement corrective actions to prevent recurrence, ensuring verification of effectiveness. Explanation: the core of managing nonconformities and implementing corrective actions within an ISO 27001-2013 framework involves a systematic process to address deviations from established requirements. When an internal audit identifies a nonconformity, such as a failure to implement a specific control from Annex A, the auditor's role is to document this finding objectively. The organization then has the responsibility to initiate corrective actions. This process typically begins with understanding the root cause of the nonconformity, not just the symptom. For instance, if a control related to access provisioning was not implemented correctly, the root cause might be a lack of clear procedures, insufficient training, or inadequate resource allocation. Following the identification of the root cause, appropriate actions are planned and implemented to eliminate the cause and prevent recurrence. The effectiveness of these corrective actions must then be verified. This verification step is crucial to ensure that the implemented actions have indeed resolved the issue and have not introduced new risks or nonconformities. The internal auditor's follow-up activity is to assess whether these corrective actions have been taken and if they are effective. This involves reviewing evidence, such as updated procedures, training records, or system logs, and potentially re-auditing the affected process. The ultimate goal is to achieve conformity and improve the overall effectiveness of the information security management system. Question 6. Consider an internal audit scenario at a financial services firm where the audit team is reviewing the effectiveness of the information security management system. They discover that the organization's customer database contains sensitive personal information, and a recent penetration test identified that the database server's operating system is running an outdated version with known security flaws. During interviews, it's confirmed that no specific controls are in place to prevent unauthorized access to this particular database beyond general network access restrictions. Which of the following best differentiates the identified security concerns according to ISO 27001:2013 Principles of Threat and Vulnerability Analysis? Option A. The outdated operating system and lack of specific database access controls represent vulnerabilities, while a potential unauthorized access to the customer data is the threat. Option B. The sensitive nature of the customer data is the primary threat, and the outdated operating system is a contributing factor to its exploitation. Option C. The potential for unauthorized access to customer data is a vulnerability, whereas the outdated operating system is the threat. Option D. The penetration test identifying security flaws is the threat, and the outdated operating system is the vulnerability that enables it. The correct answer is A. The outdated operating system and lack of specific database access controls represent vulnerabilities, while a potential unauthorized access to the customer data is the threat. Explanation. The core of understanding threat and vulnerability analysis within an ISO 27001:2013 framework lies in distinguishing between the nature of threats and the inherent weaknesses that can be exploited. A threat is an event or circumstance that could potentially cause harm to an organization's information assets. This harm could manifest as unauthorized access, disclosure, modification, destruction, or disruption of information. Vulnerabilities, on the other hand, are the conditions or weaknesses within an organization's systems, processes, or controls that a threat could exploit to cause that harm. For instance, an unpatched server is a vulnerability, while a malware attack targeting that unpatched server is a threat. The analysis process involves identifying potential threats and then determining if any vulnerabilities exist that could allow those threats to materialize. The effectiveness of an information security program, as mandated by ISO 27001:2013, hinges on accurately identifying and prioritizing these elements to implement appropriate controls. A threat's impact and likelihood are assessed, and this assessment is often informed by the presence and severity of corresponding vulnerabilities. Therefore, a threat is an external or internal potential event, while a vulnerability is an internal characteristic that makes the organization susceptible to that event. Question 7. During an internal audit of an organization's information security management system, ISMS, based on ISO 27001:2013, an auditor is reviewing the process for identifying and addressing the needs and expectations of interested parties. The organization operates in the financial services sector and must comply with stringent data protection regulations, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and local financial oversight mandates. Which of the following activities would provide the most direct evidence that the organization has effectively implemented the requirements of Clause 4? 2. Understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties in relation to these regulatory obligations. Option A. Assessing the organization's business continuity plan to ensure it addresses potential disruptions caused by natural disasters or cyber attacks affecting its primary data center. Option B. Examining the organization's employee training records to confirm that all personnel have received general awareness training on information security principles relevant to the financial sector. Option C. Reviewing documented meeting minutes from the ISM Steering Committee that explicitly discuss and record how identified GDPR data subject access request timelines and local financial data retention policies have been incorporated into the ISM's risk assessment and control selection processes. Option D. Verifying the existence of a formal contract, with a third-party cloud service provider that includes clauses related to data confidentiality and integrity. The correct answer is C. Reviewing documented meeting minutes from the ISM Steering Committee that explicitly discuss and record how identified GDPR data subject access, request timelines, and local financial data retention policies have been incorporated into the ISM's risk assessment and control selection processes. Explanation: the core of ISO 27001-2013, specifically Clause 4, to understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties, mandates that an organization must determine which interested parties are relevant to the Information Security Management System (ISMS) and what their requirements are. This determination involves identifying stakeholders such as customers, employees, suppliers, regulators, like those under GDPR or HIPAA, depending on the industry and jurisdiction, shareholders, and even the public. The organization must then establish which of these requirements are to become part of the ISMS. This is not a static process. It requires ongoing monitoring and review as the needs and expectations of these parties can change. For an internal auditor, verifying compliance with this clause involves examining evidence that the organization has systematically identified relevant interested parties, documented their applicable requirements related to information security, and integrated these requirements into the ISMS, including risk treatment and controls. The auditor would look for documented processes for stakeholder identification, communication channels, and records of how stakeholder input influences the ISMS. For instance, a regulatory body's requirement for data breach notification timelines directly impacts the incident management process within the ISMS. Similarly, a customer's contractual obligation for specific data encryption standards must be reflected in the applicable controls. The auditor's role is to confirm that this identification and integration process is robust and effective, ensuring the ISMS addresses the pertinent external and internal demands. Question 8. During an internal audit of an organization's information security management system, an auditor is reviewing the documented access control policy and its supporting procedural documents. The auditor's objective is to ensure that the documentation effectively addresses the requirements for managing user access to information and information processing facilities, as stipulated by ISO 27001-2013. Which of the following aspects, if inadequately addressed in the documented information, would represent a significant nonconformity with the spirit and intent of ISO 27001-2013, particularly concerning Annex A, 18. 1. 3. Access control. Option A. A minor omission in the policy regarding the use of personal mobile devices for accessing corporate email. Option B. Insufficient detail regarding the methodology for periodic review and recertification of user access privileges, including the frequency and responsibilities for this process. Option C. The absence of specific training materials for end users on general password security best practices. Option D. A procedural document that outlines the process for managing visitor access to the premises, but does not mention specific IT system access for visitors. Correct answer is B. Insufficient detail regarding the methodology for periodic review and recertification of user access privileges, including the frequency and responsibilities for this process. Explanation: the internal auditor's review of the documented information for the access control policy and its associated procedures requires an assessment of its alignment with the requirements of ISO 27001-2013, specifically Annex A, 18. 1. 3. Access control. The auditor must verify that the documented information clearly defines and mandates the principles of least privilege, separation of duties, and role-based access, ensuring that access rights are granted based on the legitimate need to know and the responsibilities of individuals within the organization. Furthermore, the auditor needs to confirm that the documentation specifies the processes for requesting, approving, reviewing, and revoking access, including provisions for timely updates following changes in roles or responsibilities, which directly supports the control objectives outlined in ISO 27001-2013. The review also involves checking for consistency between the policy and the procedures, and whether they address the management of user access to information systems and applications, as well as physical access to secure areas. The auditor's task is to determine if the documented information provides a robust framework for managing access, thereby contributing to the overall security posture of the information security management system. Question 9. During an internal audit of an organization's information security management system, ISMS, based on ISO 27001-2013, an auditor observes that while an information security policy exists and is communicated, there is a noticeable lack of management participation in security awareness initiatives and a general reluctance to allocate sufficient budget for advanced threat detection tools. The auditor also notes that information security objectives are rarely discussed in executive leadership meetings. Based on these observations, what is the most likely root cause of potential nonconformities related to management commitment? Option A. The organization's reliance on external service providers for critical security functions. Option B. Insufficient demonstration of leadership and commitment by top management to the ISMS. Option C. A failure to establish a comprehensive risk assessment methodology for the ISMS. Option D. Inadequate training provided to the information security team regarding their roles and responsibilities. The correct answer is B. Insufficient demonstration of leadership and commitment by top management to the ISMS. Explanation. The effectiveness of an information security management system, ISMS, is significantly influenced by the active involvement and visible support of top management. ISO 27001-2013 Clause 5. 1. Management commitment mandates that top management demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to the ISMS. This includes ensuring the information security policy and objectives are established and that the ISMS is integrated into the organization's business processes. Furthermore, top management must ensure the availability of resources, communicate the importance of effective information security management, and ensure that the ISMS achieves its intended outcomes. They are also responsible for directing and supporting personnel in their contribution to the effectiveness of the ISMS and for promoting continual improvement. In the context of an internal audit, an auditor would look for evidence of these activities. For instance, reviewing meeting minutes where information security is a regular agenda item, observing management's participation in security awareness campaigns, or examining resource allocation decisions for security initiatives would all provide insight into management commitment. Without this commitment, the ISMS is likely to be perceived as a compliance exercise rather than a strategic imperative, leading to a lack of resources, buy-in from employees, and ultimately, a less effective security posture. The audit finding would focus on the observable actions and decisions of top management that either support or undermine the ISMS. Question 10. During an ISO 27001-2013 internal audit of the access control process, an auditee states, "We ensure only authorized personnel can access critical systems." What interviewing technique would be most effective for the auditor to gain a deeper understanding of the specific controls and their implementation? Option A. Following up with a probing question such as, "Could you walk me through the exact steps taken to verify user identity and authorization before granting system access?" Option B. Suggesting that the current process might be insufficient based on preliminary observations. Option C. Immediately referencing the organization's documented access control policy to confirm compliance. Option D. Asking a closed-ended question like, "Is the access control process fully automated?" The correct answer is A. Following up with a probing question such as, "Could you walk me through the exact steps taken to verify user identity and authorization before granting system access?" Explanation. The internal auditor's role in an ISO 27001-2013 audit is to gather objective evidence to determine conformity with the standard and the organization's own policies and procedures. When conducting interviews, the auditor must employ techniques that elicit accurate and complete information. Open-ended questions are crucial for encouraging detailed responses and understanding the interviewee's perspective and knowledge. Probing questions are used to delve deeper into initial responses, clarify ambiguities, and obtain specific details. For instance, if an interviewee states, "We follow security procedures," a probing question like, "Can you describe the specific steps you take when handling sensitive customer data?" would be more effective than a closed-ended question. Silence can be a powerful interviewing tool, allowing the interviewee time to think and elaborate, often revealing more information than if the auditor immediately jumped in with another question. Document review is a foundational activity to prepare for interviews and to corroborate findings, but it is not a direct interviewing technique itself. Leading questions, which suggest a desired answer, can bias responses and are generally avoided in objective auditing. Therefore, the most effective approach to gathering comprehensive information during an interview involves a combination of open-ended questions to encourage elaboration and probing questions to elicit specific details and clarifications, supported by the strategic use of silence. Question 11. During an internal audit of an organization's information security management system, an auditor is focusing on the operational requirements outlined in Clause 8 of ISO 27001:2013. The auditor needs to verify the organization's adherence to the principles of proactive risk management. Which of the following audit activities would most directly confirm compliance with the requirement for a systematic approach to identifying and evaluating risks? Option A. Examining the documented information security risk assessment methodology and evidence of its consistent application across different business units. Option B. Reviewing the organization's incident response plan and the records of past security incidents to assess their handling. Option C. Verifying the procedures for vulnerability management and the frequency of vulnerability scanning activities. Option D. Assessing the effectiveness of implemented security controls based on post-incident analysis and user feedback. The correct answer is A. Examining the documented information security risk assessment methodology and evidence of its consistent application across different business units. Explanation. The core of this question lies in understanding the proactive measures required by ISO 27001:2013 Clause 8. 2. Information security risk assessment, and how an internal auditor verifies compliance. Clause 8. 2 mandates that an organization shall define and implement an information security risk assessment process to identify, analyze, and evaluate information security risks. This process must be applied consistently across the entire scope of the ISMs. An internal auditor's role is to assess whether this process is not only defined, but also effectively implemented and maintained. And reviewing the operational aspects of risk management, an auditor would look for evidence that the organization has a documented methodology for risk assessment, that this methodology is consistently applied to all relevant assets and threats, and that the results of these assessments inform the selection of controls. The absence of a defined and consistently applied risk assessment methodology, even if some risks are identified ad hoc, would represent a nonconformity with Clause 8. 2. Therefore, verifying the existence and consistent application of a documented risk assessment process is a fundamental audit activity for this clause. Other activities, while important for overall security, do not directly address the requirement for a systematic and consistent risk assessment process as mandated by 8. 2. For example, reviewing incident response procedures. Clause 8. 3 focuses on reactive measures, while reviewing the effectiveness of implemented controls. Clause 8. 2. 3 in Annex A, which is related but not the primary focus of 8. 2 itself is a subsequent step after risks have been identified and assessed. The management of vulnerabilities Annex A. 12. 6. 1 is a specific control area that might be informed by risk assessment, but is not the assessment process itself. Question 12. When assessing the effectiveness of the access control mechanisms implemented to protect sensitive client data, an internal auditor reviews the configuration settings, operational logs, and user access reviews. The auditor notes that while the controls are technically configured according to policy and logs are generated, there have been 2 documented instances in the past quarter where unauthorized personnel accessed client records due to a combination of weak password practices not being consistently enforced by the system, and a failure to revoke access promptly after an employee's role change. What is the primary deficiency indicated by this scenario regarding the effectiveness of the access control measures? Option A. The user access review process is flawed, requiring a complete overhaul of the user entitlement framework. Option B. The technical configuration of the access control systems does not align with the documented information security policies. Option C. The access controls are not consistently achieving their intended security objective of preventing unauthorized access due to operational gaps in enforcement and timely deprovisioning. Option D. The audit logs are insufficient for determining the effectiveness of access controls, necessitating additional logging mechanisms. Correct answer is C. The access controls are not consistently achieving their intended security objective of preventing unauthorized access due to operational gaps in enforcement and timely deprovisioning. Explanation: the effectiveness of an information security control is not solely determined by its presence or a simple check of its implementation. Instead, it requires a systematic evaluation of whether the control is achieving its intended security objective and contributing to the overall risk treatment strategy. This involves verifying that the control is operating as designed, that it is consistently applied, and that it is producing the desired outcome in reducing identified risks. For an internal auditor, this means moving beyond a simple "is it there?" to a "does it work and is it still relevant?" assessment. Factors such as the control's alignment with current threats, its resilience against sophisticated attacks, its impact on operational efficiency, and its ability to adapt to changing business requirements are all crucial. Furthermore, evidence of the control's performance, such as audit logs, incident reports, or user feedback, provides objective data for this assessment. The control's ability to meet specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, smart security objectives is a key indicator of its effectiveness. An auditor must consider the control's ability to prevent, detect, or correct security incidents, and its contribution to maintaining the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets. Question 13. An internal auditor is tasked with assessing the effectiveness of the implemented access control measures for a critical customer database. The organization's policy mandates that access to this database is restricted to personnel with a verified need to know and requires a two-factor authentication process. During the audit, the auditor observes that while the two-factor authentication is technically functional, several IT support staff members who do not directly manage customer accounts have been granted administrative privileges within the database itself, allowing them to view all customer records. Which of the following most accurately reflects the auditor's finding regarding the effectiveness of the access control? Option A. The control is ineffective because the implemented access rights do not align with the principle of least privilege, despite the technical functionality of the authentication mechanism. Option B. The control is ineffective solely due to potential performance degradation caused by the multi-factor authentication system. Option C. The control is considered effective as the two-factor authentication process is operational, meeting the technical requirement for access. Option D. The control is effective because all users accessing the database have successfully completed the two-factor authentication challenge. The correct answer is A. The control is ineffective because the implemented access rights do not align with the principle of least privilege, despite the technical functionality of the authentication mechanism. Explanation: the effectiveness of an information security control is measured by its ability to achieve its intended security objective. When an internal auditor is verifying the effectiveness of access control mechanisms for sensitive customer data, they need to assess if the controls prevent unauthorized access and ensure that only authorized personnel can view or modify the data. This involves testing the implementation and operation of the controls. For instance, if the control is a multi-factor authentication system, the auditor would test if it requires more than one authentication factor, if the factors are correctly implemented, e.g., a password and a one-time code from a token, and if the system correctly grants or denies access based on successful authentication. The auditor would also verify if the access rights assigned to users align with their job roles and responsibilities, as defined in the organization's access control policy. This verification process involves examining records, performing direct observation, and conducting user interviews. The ultimate goal is to determine if the control consistently prevents unauthorized access and facilitates authorized access, thereby meeting its security objective as per ISO 27001, 2013 Clause 9. 2. 1. Internal Audit, and Annex A 12. 1. 1. Control of development and support activities, and Annex A 9. Access control. The question probes the auditor's understanding of how to assess the operational success of a security measure against its defined purpose, rather than just its existence or documentation. Question 14. During an internal audit of a technology firm's information security management system, an auditor observed that while user access to development environments was managed through a defined role-based access control matrix, the documented procedure for deprovisioning access for employees who had resigned was not consistently followed. Specifically, there was no evidence of a periodic audit to verify that access had been promptly and completely removed from all relevant systems for departing personnel. Which of the following ISO 27001-2013 Annex A control objectives is most directly challenged by this finding? Option A. Management of user access throughout the user lifecycle. Option B. Secure development of software applications. Option C. Physical security of information processing facilities. Option D. Protection of information systems from malware. The correct answer is A. Management of user access throughout the user lifecycle. Explanation. The scenario describes a situation where an internal auditor is reviewing the implementation of access control measures within a software development team. The auditor identifies that while the team has implemented a role-based access control RBAC system, the process for revoking access for departing employees is not consistently documented or audited, leading to a potential gap. ISO 27001-2013 Annex A923 Management of Privileged Access Rights and A925 Review of User Access Rights are directly relevant here. A923 mandates that access rights for privileged users should be restricted and carefully controlled, implying a need for rigorous processes for granting and revoking such rights. A925 requires regular reviews of user access rights to ensure they remain appropriate. The lack of a defined and audited process for access revocation directly contravenes the spirit and intent of these controls, as it fails to ensure that access rights are appropriately managed throughout the user lifecycle, particularly upon departure. Therefore, the most appropriate control objective being addressed by the auditor's finding is the effective management of user access throughout its lifecycle, which encompasses both granting and revoking permissions. This ensures that unauthorized access is prevented, especially when an individual is no longer associated with the organization or a specific role. Question 15. Consider a scenario where an information security internal audit team is preparing to assess the effectiveness of the organization's incident response plan. The lead auditor, Anya, was previously the primary developer of the incident response procedures and has been actively involved in simulating and testing these procedures in her regular duties. Which of the following actions by Anya would be most consistent with the fundamental principles of internal auditing as defined in ISO 27001-2013 regarding independence and objectivity? Option A. Anya should proceed with auditing the incident response plan, but ensure she documents her prior involvement extensively in the audit report to provide context for her findings. Option B. Anya should audit the incident response plan, but focus her evaluation solely on the documented procedures and not on the practical execution or testing aspects. Option C. Anya should delegate the audit of the incident response plan to a junior auditor, who can then report their findings directly to Anya for final review and approval. Option D. Anya should recuse herself from auditing the incident response plan and recommend a colleague who has no prior involvement with its development or execution be assigned to lead that specific audit area. The correct answer is D. Anya should recuse herself from auditing the incident response plan and recommend a colleague who has no prior involvement with its development or execution be assigned to lead that specific audit area. Explanation. The principle of independence in auditing, as applied to ISO 27001-2013 internal audits, mandates that auditors must be free from any conflicts of interest that could compromise their objectivity. This means an auditor should not audit their own work or their own department. For instance, if an auditor is responsible for managing the access control system within their organization, they cannot then audit the effectiveness of that same access control system as part of an internal audit. This would create a situation where the auditor is evaluating their own performance and decisions, directly violating the principle of independence and objectivity. The auditor's findings could be biased, either consciously or unconsciously, to reflect favorably or unfavorably on their own responsibilities. Therefore, to maintain the integrity and credibility of the audit process, auditors must be assigned to areas or processes for which they have no direct operational responsibility or prior involvement that could impair their impartiality. This ensures that the audit is conducted with an unbiased perspective, focusing solely on conformity to the standard and the organization's own policies and procedures. The audit report's reliance on factual evidence and objective assessment is paramount. Question 16. During an internal audit of an organization's information security management system, an auditor is examining records pertaining to human resource security. The auditor notes that all employees undergo a mandatory information security awareness session as part of their onboarding process, covering general policy guidelines. However, the audit review of the IT department reveals that system administrators, who possess elevated privileges to critical databases and network infrastructure, have not received any specific training modules beyond the general onboarding content. What is the most accurate audit finding concerning the effectiveness of a 7 human resource security controls in this context? Option A. Nonconformity. Role-specific information security training is not provided to personnel with privileged access to critical systems. Option B. Observation. The organization's general information security policy awareness training is insufficient for all personnel. Option C. Observation. Background checks for personnel with access to sensitive information are not consistently performed. Option D. Nonconformity. The process for managing employee terminations and ensuring data removal is not adequately documented. The correct answer is A. Nonconformity. Role-specific information security training is not provided to personnel with privileged access to critical systems. Explanation. The scenario describes an internal audit where an auditor is reviewing the effectiveness of a 7.2.2 information security awareness, education, and training within an organization. The auditor observes that while all employees have received a general overview of the organization's information security policy during onboarding, there is no documented evidence of specialized training for personnel with privileged access to sensitive systems, such as database administrators or system engineers. ISO 27001, 2013, specifically in Annex A, 7.2.2, mandates that personnel should receive appropriate training relevant to their roles and responsibilities concerning information security. This includes ensuring that individuals handling critical data or managing secure systems are adequately equipped with the knowledge and skills to protect that information. The absence of tailored training for privileged users represents a significant gap in addressing specific security risks associated with their elevated access levels. Therefore, the most appropriate finding for the auditor to document would be a nonconformity related to the lack of role-specific training for personnel with privileged access, as this directly contravenes the intent and requirements of the standard for ensuring all personnel are competent in their information security duties. The other options are less precise or address different aspects of human resource security, not directly highlighted as the primary deficiency in the given scenario. For instance, while a general security policy is important, its existence does not negate the need for specialized training. Similarly, focusing solely on the termination process, a 7.3 or background checks, a 7.1 does not address the core issue of ongoing training for current employees with critical roles. Question 17. During an internal audit of an organization's information security management system, an auditor observes that a junior marketing associate, responsible for social media content creation and scheduling, has been granted administrative rights to the organization's primary customer relationship management (CRM) database. This level of access allows the associate to modify, delete, and export all customer records, tasks far beyond their defined job responsibilities. Which core information security principle is most clearly violated in this scenario, and what is the most appropriate corrective action from an ISO 27001-2013 perspective? Option A. The principle of segregation of duties is violated. The corrective action should involve assigning the CRM database management to a separate IT team. Option B. The principle of defense in depth is violated. The corrective action should involve implementing additional network firewalls to protect the CRM database. Option C. The principle of least privilege is violated. The corrective action should involve reviewing and restricting the associate's CRM access to only those functions necessary for their marketing duties. Option D. The principle of need to know is violated. The corrective action should involve encrypting all customer data within the CRM database. The correct answer is C. The principle of least privilege is violated. The corrective action should involve reviewing and restricting the associate's CRM access to only those functions necessary for their marketing duties. Explanation. The principle of least privilege dictates that an individual or system should only be granted the minimum level of access or permissions necessary to perform its intended function. This is a fundamental security concept aimed at reducing the potential impact of compromised accounts or malicious insiders. In the context of ISO 27001-2013, implementing least privilege supports controls within Annex A, specifically A6.1. 2. Access control, business requirements of information systems, and A9.2. 2. User access management, user registration. By limiting access, the potential for unauthorized disclosure, modification, or destruction of information is significantly reduced. This principle is not about granting broad access and then revoking it, but rather about proactively assigning only the necessary permissions from the outset. This proactive approach aligns with the ISO 27001 requirement to establish and maintain an information security management system that protects the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets. The scenario describes a situation where a user has elevated privileges that are not required for their daily tasks, creating an unnecessary risk. The most effective way to address this, in line with information security principles and ISO 27001, is to review and adjust their access rights to match their job function, thereby enforcing the principle of least privilege. Question 18. An internal auditor is examining the effectiveness of an organization's ISMs based on ISO 27001-2013. The organization, a financial services firm, is based in the European Union and has recently expanded its operations into North America. The auditor needs to assess how the organization has considered its context in establishing the ISMs. Which of the following activities would be most indicative of the auditor's verification of the organization's understanding of its context as per Clause 4? 1. Option A. Auditing the access control lists for critical systems to verify that only authorized personnel can access sensitive data. Option B. Examining the organization's network architecture diagrams to ensure they comply with the latest cybersecurity best practices for financial institutions. Option C. Assessing the training records of all employees to confirm completion of mandatory information security awareness modules. Option D. Reviewing meeting minutes from the ISM Steering Committee to confirm discussions and documented decisions regarding the impact of the EU's NIS directive and the upcoming CCPA regulations on the organization's information security posture. Correct answer is D. Reviewing meeting minutes from the ISM Steering Committee to confirm discussions and documented decisions regarding the impact of the EU's NIS directive and the upcoming CCPA regulations on the organization's information security posture. Explanation. The internal auditor's role in understanding the organization and its context, as defined by ISO 27001-2013 Clause 4. 1. Is to identify external and internal issues that are relevant to the organization's purpose and its strategic direction, and that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcome, of its information security management system, ISMs. This involves a thorough examination of factors such as legal requirements, technological advancements, market changes, and the organization's internal culture, structure, and resources. The auditor must assess how these factors can impact the ISMs, both positively and negatively, and how they influence the organization's ability to establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve the ISMs. For instance, a new data privacy regulation like GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, would be an external issue that necessitates understanding its implications for data handling practices within the ISMs. Similarly, a significant shift in the company's business model, such as moving to a cloud-first strategy, is an internal issue that requires assessing its impact on the security controls and risk treatment plans of the ISMs. The auditor's objective is to verify that the organization has adequately identified and considered these contextual factors when defining the scope and objectives of its ISMs, and that these factors are being monitored and reviewed for ongoing relevance. This foundational understanding is crucial for ensuring that the ISMs is aligned with the organization's overall strategic goals and operational realities. Question 19. During an internal audit of a financial services firm's information security management system, ISMs, based on ISO 27001-2013, an auditor observes that the organization has implemented strong technical measures for data-at-rest encryption, including AES 256 with a robust key management system. However, The audit trail reveals that the documented risk assessment process, which should have informed the selection and configuration of these specific encryption algorithms and key handling procedures, is incomplete and lacks detailed justification for the chosen parameters. The organization's policy on risk assessment is present, but the evidence linking the identified risks to the selected encryption standards is absent. Considering the requirements of ISO 27001/2013, what is the most precise finding the internal auditor should record? Option A. A recommendation to update the statement of applicability to include more detailed justifications for all selected controls. Option B. A minor nonconformity related to the completeness of the asset inventory, as encryption applies to specific data assets. Option C. Observation regarding the need for enhanced user awareness training on the importance of strong encryption practices. Option D. Nonconformity with Clause 6. 1. 2. Information security risk assessment. Due to the absence of documented evidence linking identified risks to the selection of specific encryption controls and parameters. The correct answer is D. Nonconformity with Clause 6. 1. 2. Information security risk assessment. Due to the absence of documented evidence linking identified risks to the selection of specific encryption controls and parameters. Explanation. The scenario describes a situation where an internal auditor is evaluating an organization's compliance with ISO 27001/2013. The auditor discovers that while the organization has implemented a robust set of technical controls for data encryption, they have failed to document the risk assessment process that led to the selection of these specific encryption algorithms and key management procedures. Clause 6. 1. 2 of ISO 27001/2013, titled Information Security Risk Assessment, mandates that the organization shall perform information security risk assessments at planned intervals or when significant changes occur. This clause requires the organization to establish and maintain a process for risk assessment and risk treatment. Crucially, the standard emphasizes the need for documented evidence of this process, including the criteria for accepting risks and the methodology used. The absence of documented evidence for the risk assessment that underpin the encryption controls means that the organization cannot demonstrate that the chosen controls are appropriate and proportionate to the identified risks. This directly impacts the auditee's ability to prove conformity with the requirements for risk assessment and the subsequent selection of controls as outlined in the standard. Therefore, the most accurate finding for the internal auditor to record is the nonconformity related to the documented risk assessment process, as this is a fundamental requirement for establishing and maintaining an effective information security management system. The other options, while potentially related to good security practices, do not directly address the core requirement that has been demonstrably missed in the context of the auditor's findings. The lack of documented risk assessment for controls is a direct contravention of the systematic approach required by the standard. Question 20. An internal auditor is evaluating the effectiveness of the management review process for an organization's information security management system. The auditor has reviewed the minutes of the last 3 management review meetings. Which of the following findings would most strongly indicate that the management review process is meeting the requirements of ISO 27001/2013, specifically concerning the review of suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness? Option A. Minutes show a review of compliance with specific regulatory requirements such as GDPR, but do not explicitly link these to the overall suitability or effectiveness of the ISMs as a whole. Option B. Minutes primarily focus on the scheduling of future ISMs audits and the procurement of new security hardware, with limited discussion of ISMs performance or strategic alignment. Option C. Minutes document discussions and decisions regarding the implementation of new security controls based on identified risks and the status of previous corrective actions, along with resource allocation for security initiatives. Option D. Minutes reflect a general consensus among attendees that the ISMs is working well without specific data points or analysis of ISMs performance metrics. The correct answer is C. Minutes document discussions and decisions regarding the implementation of new security controls based on identified risks and the status of previous corrective actions, along with resource allocation for security initiatives. Explanation. The management review process, as stipulated in ISO 27001/2013 Clause 9, 3. Requires top management to periodically review the Information Security Management System, ISMS, to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. The inputs to this review are critical for ensuring a comprehensive assessment. These inputs, as detailed in the standard, include feedback on nonconformities and corrective actions, results of internal audits and conformity assessments, performance of the ISMS, communication from interested parties, results of risk assessment and status of risk treatment plans, and opportunities for improvement. The outputs of the management review must include decisions and actions related to opportunities for improvement, any need for changes to the ISMS, and resource requirements. Therefore, when considering the effectiveness of the management review, an auditor would look for evidence that these specific inputs were considered, and that the outputs generated are actionable and address the ISM's overall performance and strategic direction. The presence of documented decisions and actions directly linked to the ISM's suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness, derived from the specified inputs, signifies a robust management review. Question 21. An internal auditor is tasked with assessing the effectiveness of an organization's information security policy as mandated by ISO 27001:2013. The organization has a documented policy that has been formally approved by top management. Which of the following auditor actions would provide the most robust evidence of the policy's practical implementation and adherence across all relevant departments? Option A. Verifying that the information security policy is publicly accessible on the organization's external website for stakeholders. Option B. Analyzing the minutes of top management meetings to identify discussions related to the policy's review and any proposed amendments. Option C. Reviewing employee training records and interviewing a sample of staff to confirm their understanding and awareness of the policy's key principles and their individual responsibilities. Option D. Examining the most recent version of the information security policy document for management approval signatures and the date of last revision. The correct answer is C. Reviewing employee training records and interviewing a sample of staff to confirm their understanding and awareness of the policy's key principles and their individual responsibilities. Explanation. The question tests the understanding of how an internal auditor verifies the effectiveness of an organization's information security policies in accordance with ISO 27001:2013. Clause 5 of ISO 27001:2013 mandates that top management establish, implement, and maintain an information security policy. This policy should be approved by management, communicated within the organization, and made available to interested parties as appropriate. An internal auditor's role is to assess conformity with these requirements. To effectively audit the policy, the auditor must verify that the policy exists, is approved, has been communicated to all relevant personnel, and is consistently applied across the organization. This involves reviewing evidence of communication, such as training records, intranet postings, or employee acknowledgments, and checking for evidence of the policy's integration into daily operations and decision-making processes. The auditor would look for instances where the policy's principles are reflected in departmental procedures, risk assessments, and incident response plans. Simply having the policy documented and approved is insufficient. Its practical implementation and awareness among staff are crucial indicators of its effectiveness. Therefore, the most comprehensive approach for an auditor to assess the policy's effectiveness is to examine its communication and demonstrable application throughout the organization. Question 22. Consider a scenario where an internal audit of a financial services firm's information security management system, aligned with ISO 27001:2013, identifies a significant risk. This risk involves the potential for unauthorized access to sensitive customer financial data due to a combination of weak password policies and a lack of real-time monitoring for anomalous login attempts. The risk assessment categorizes this as having a high likelihood and a high impact. Which risk treatment approach would be most effective in mitigating this identified risk according to the principles of ISO 27001:2013? Option A. Enhance the existing employee security awareness training program to emphasize the importance of password security and data protection. Option B. Formally accept the risk, acknowledging its existence, but deciding not to implement any specific controls due to perceived high implementation costs. Option C. Implement a multi-factor authentication system, enforce strong password complexity rules, and deploy continuous monitoring solutions to detect suspicious login patterns. Option D. Purchase comprehensive cyber insurance coverage to financially compensate for any potential data breach and its consequences. The correct answer is C. Implement a multi-factor authentication system, enforce strong password complexity rules, and deploy continuous monitoring solutions to detect suspicious login patterns. Explanation: the core principle of ISO 27001-2013 in risk treatment is to select and implement appropriate controls to mitigate identified risks. When a risk is assessed as having a high likelihood of occurrence and a high potential impact, the organization must consider controls that effectively reduce both these factors. Option A proposes a combination of implementing technical controls, like enhanced access controls and intrusion detection systems, and procedural controls, such as stricter data handling policies and mandatory security awareness training. This multi-layered approach directly addresses both the technical vulnerabilities that could lead to an incident and the human factors that contribute to risk. Technical controls aim to prevent unauthorized access or malicious activity, while procedural controls reinforce secure behaviors and organizational discipline. The combination is designed to reduce the likelihood of the event occurring, and if it does occur, to minimize its impact through better preparedness and response. Other options, while potentially relevant in certain contexts, do not offer the same comprehensive risk reduction strategy for a high-severity risk. For instance, relying solely on insurance, option B, is a risk financing strategy, not a risk reduction strategy, and does not prevent the incident itself. Accepting the risk, option C, is only appropriate if the cost of treatment outweighs the potential impact, which is unlikely for a high-severity risk. Implementing only procedural controls without addressing underlying technical vulnerabilities, option D, might leave the organization susceptible to sophisticated attacks. Therefore, a balanced application of technical and procedural controls is the most robust approach for treating high-severity risks. Question 23. Following an internal audit that identified a recurring nonconformity related to the consistent application of data classification procedures across different departments, the ISMS manager proposes a three-pronged approach to address the issue under Clause 10 of ISO 27001-2013. The first step involves immediate retraining of all personnel involved in data handling. The second step is to update the data classification policy to include more explicit examples and clearer responsibilities. The third step is to implement an automated data classification tool to assist in consistent application. Which aspect of improvement does this comprehensive strategy most effectively target? Option A. Enhancing the effectiveness of the ISMS through systematic corrective actions, addressing root causes and preventing recurrence. Option B. Increasing the number of documented procedures within the ISMS to meet compliance mandates. Option C. Reducing the overall cost of the ISMS by leveraging technological solutions for operational tasks. Option D. Expanding the scope of the ISMS to encompass new regulatory requirements identified during the audit. The correct answer is A. Enhancing the effectiveness of the ISMS through systematic corrective actions, addressing root causes and preventing recurrence. Explanation: Clause 10 of ISO 27001-2013, Improvement, mandates that the organization continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the Information Security Management System, ISMS. This involves identifying opportunities for improvement and implementing necessary actions to enhance the ISMS. A key component of this is the handling of nonconformities and the implementation of corrective actions. When a nonconformity is identified, such as a failure to adhere to a security policy during an internal audit, the organization must take action to control and correct it. Following this, it must investigate the root cause of the nonconformity to prevent recurrence. The process involves reviewing the effectiveness of the corrective action taken. This systematic approach ensures that weaknesses are addressed and that the ISMS becomes more robust over time. For instance, if an internal audit reveals that access controls were not consistently applied to a critical system, the organization would first correct the immediate access issue, then investigate why the policy wasn't followed. E.g., lack of training, unclear procedures, implement training or revise procedures as a corrective action, and finally, monitor the system to ensure the corrective action has effectively prevented future lapses. This continuous cycle of evaluation and action is central to the improvement clause. Question 24. During an internal audit of an organization's ISMs, an auditor discovers that system access logs for a critical database containing sensitive customer PII are only retained for 30 days and lack detailed timestamps, only recording the date of access. This situation directly impacts which core security principles auditable evidence. Option A, integrity. Option B, availability. Option C, accountability. Option D, confidentiality. The correct answer is C, accountability. Explanation. When auditing an information security management system, ISMs, based on ISO 27001-2013, an internal auditor must verify that the controls related to authentication, authorization, and accountability are effectively implemented and maintained. Authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user or system. Authorization is the process of granting or denying access to resources based on the authenticated identity. Accountability ensures that actions performed by users can be traced back to them. Clause 6, 1.2 Management of resources and Annexa controls, specifically A9 access control and A11 physical and environmental security are relevant here. A9, 1 network access control and A9, 1 information access restriction directly address these principles. For instance, an auditor might examine logs to confirm that only authorized personnel can access sensitive data and that all access attempts, successful or failed, are recorded and auditable. This log review is a crucial part of verifying accountability. If logs are incomplete, tampered with, or do not contain sufficient detail to trace actions to specific individuals, it indicates a weakness in the accountability controls, which is a direct nonconformity against the intent of ISO 27001-2013, particularly concerning the ability to demonstrate compliance and respond to security incidents. The effectiveness of authentication mechanisms, such as multi-factor authentication, is also assessed to ensure that only legitimate users gain access, thereby supporting authorization and accountability. Question 25. Consider an internal audit scenario where an auditor is reviewing the effectiveness of an organization's information security risk treatment plan. The auditor observes that the organization has identified a specific weakness in its legacy data archiving system, where data is stored in an unencrypted format. The auditor also notes that the organization's threat intelligence reports indicate a rising trend in sophisticated phishing attacks targeting sensitive financial data. How would an internal auditor classify the relationship between the unencrypted data storage and the potential for unauthorized access to sensitive financial information within the context of ISO 27001-2013 threat and vulnerability analysis? Option A. Both the unencrypted data storage and the phishing attacks are considered independent risks that do not directly interact within the ISMS framework. Option B. The organization's risk assessment process itself is the primary vulnerability, and the unencrypted data is a secondary threat to operational continuity. Option C. The unencrypted data storage represents a vulnerability, and the phishing attacks represent a threat that could exploit this vulnerability to access sensitive financial data. Option D. The phishing attacks represent a vulnerability, and the unencrypted data storage represents a threat that could lead to data compromise. The correct answer is C. The unencrypted data storage represents a vulnerability, and the phishing attacks represent a threat that could exploit this vulnerability to access sensitive financial data. Explanation. The core of ISO 27001-2013, particularly concerning threat and vulnerability analysis within an information security management system, ISMS, revolves around understanding the relationship between potential weaknesses and harmful events. A vulnerability is a flaw or weakness in an asset or its controls that could be exploited by a threat. A threat is any circumstance or event that could potentially cause harm to an asset by exploiting a vulnerability. Threat and vulnerability analysis is the process of identifying these vulnerabilities and the threats that could exploit them, and then assessing the potential impact and likelihood of such events occurring. This analysis informs the selection of appropriate controls to mitigate risks. When an internal auditor reviews the ISMs, they would look for evidence that this systematic process has been followed. The identification of a specific weakness in a system's access control mechanism, a vulnerability, and the subsequent consideration of how unauthorized personnel might gain access, a threat, is a direct application of this concept. This process is fundamental to risk assessment, which is a cornerstone of ISO 27001. The auditor would seek to confirm that the organization has a documented methodology for identifying vulnerabilities and assessing the threats that could exploit them, leading to informed decisions about security controls. Question 26. An internal audit of a financial services firm, certified under ISO 27001-2013, revealed that several marketing department personnel were consistently attempting to access a sensitive customer financial data database, despite lacking a documented business requirement for such access. The audit findings indicated that these attempts were logged over a 2-week period. Firm's access control policy clearly states that access is granted based on need to know and least privilege. Which of the following best describes the most appropriate classification of this audit finding concerning the information security management system? Option A. A nonconformity related to the ineffective implementation of access control policies and procedures, specifically concerning user access rights and information access restrictions. Option B. An opportunity for improvement in the general training program for marketing department employees regarding data handling policies. Option C. A minor deviation from the established incident management process due to the lack of immediate reporting of the access attempts. Option D. A finding that indicates a deficiency in the physical security controls for the server room housing the database. The correct answer is A. A nonconformity related to the ineffective implementation of access control policies and procedures, specifically concerning user access rights and information access restrictions. Explanation. During an internal audit of a financial services organization adhering to ISO 27001-2013, an auditor reviewed the access control logs for a critical database. The auditor observed that multiple users from the marketing department, who had no legitimate business need for accessing sensitive customer financial data, were repeatedly attempting to log into this database. The organization's access control policy, Clause 9.1.2, mandates that access to information and information processing facilities shall be granted based on the principle of need to know and least privilege. The logs show these unauthorized access attempts occurred over a period of 2 weeks. The auditor identified this as a nonconformity because the implemented access controls, as evidenced by the logs and user permissions, did not align with the established policy and the requirements of the standard for access control. Specifically, the Control A.9.2.3 Management of Privileged Access Rights and A.9.4.1 Information Access Restriction were not effectively implemented, as evidenced by the potential for unauthorized access and the lack of timely detection or prevention of such attempts. The auditor also noted that the review of access rights A.9.2.5 had not identified this discrepancy. This situation represents a failure to maintain the integrity and confidentiality of information as required by the standard. The auditor's report should clearly state the observed evidence, the relevant clause requirements, and the resulting nonconformity. The organization needs to investigate the root cause of these attempts, review and potentially revoke unnecessary access privileges, and strengthen monitoring and alerting mechanisms to prevent recurrence. This also points to a potential weakness in the user access management process, which falls under the scope of the Information Security Management System, ISMS. Question 27. During an internal audit of a financial services organization's client data handling procedures, an auditor observes a data entry clerk accessing a client record on their workstation, while simultaneously engaging in a personal conversation via a video call on the same machine. The organization's Information Security Policy, ISP, explicitly prohibits the use of company equipment for non-business-related activities during working hours, and the ISMS documentation for Annex A. 8.1.3, Acceptable Use of Information and Other Assets, mandates that all client data processing must be conducted with sole focus on the task. Which of the following observational findings is the most accurate and objective representation of this situation for the audit report? Option A. The observed behavior indicates a potential risk of unauthorized disclosure of client information due to the clerk's divided attention. Option B. The auditor observed a data entry clerk using company equipment for personal video conferencing while accessing sensitive client data, which appears to contravene the acceptable use policy in Annex A. 8.1.3. Option C. The clerk is clearly neglecting their duties and potentially exposing client data through multitasking, indicating a severe control weakness. Option D. The auditor witnessed a lapse in concentration by the clerk, suggesting a need for immediate retraining on data handling protocols. Correct answer is B. The auditor observed a data entry clerk using company equipment for personal video conferencing while accessing sensitive client data, which appears to contravene the acceptable use policy in Annex A. 8.1.3. Explanation. The effectiveness of an internal audit hinges on the auditor's ability to gather accurate and comprehensive information. Observation is a key technique for this, allowing the auditor to witness processes, behaviors, and environmental factors firsthand. When an auditor observes a critical control point, such as the physical access to a server room, they are looking for adherence to documented procedures and security policies. For instance, if the procedure requires a key card and a PIN for entry, and the auditor witnesses an individual using only a key card, this is a direct observation of a potential nonconformity. The auditor must then record this observation objectively, noting the specific deviation from the expected control. This factual recording is crucial for subsequent analysis and reporting. The auditor's role is not to immediately implement corrective actions or to make assumptions about the cause of the deviation, but rather to document what was seen. The focus is on the observable evidence, which forms the basis for identifying areas of improvement or noncompliance within the information security management system. This empirical data gathering through direct observation supports the overall audit objective of verifying the effectiveness of controls and the alignment of practices with the established ISM's requirements. Question 28. During an internal audit of an organization's information security management system, an auditor is conducting an interview with a senior system administrator regarding the implementation of access control measures as per ISO 27001-2013 Annex A. 5.1.1. The administrator appears hesitant and provides brief, guarded responses to questions about user access provisioning and deprovisioning processes. What fundamental auditing principle should the auditor prioritize to encourage more open and informative dialogue, thereby gathering more appropriate audit evidence? Option A. Documenting the administrator's reluctance as a potential indicator of non-compliance without further inquiry. Option B. Directly challenging the administrator's responses to identify inconsistencies and potential nonconformities immediately. Option C. Focusing exclusively on technical aspects of access control without delving into procedural details to maintain efficiency. Option D. Establishing rapport and demonstrating active listening to build trust and encourage detailed responses. The correct answer is D. Establishing rapport and demonstrating active listening to build trust and encourage detailed responses. Explanation. The core of effective internal auditing, particularly within the context of ISO 27001-2013, lies in gathering accurate and comprehensive evidence. Interviews are a primary method for this, but their success hinges on the auditor's ability to elicit truthful and relevant information. An auditor must cultivate an environment of trust and psychological safety, making the interviewee feel comfortable and unthreatened. This is achieved through a professional demeanor, clear communication of the audit's purpose and scope, and demonstrating genuine listening skills. The auditor's preparation is paramount, understanding the auditee's role, the specific controls being examined, and potential areas of nonconformity allows for targeted, insightful questions. Open-ended questions are crucial for encouraging detailed responses, while follow-up questions probe for clarification and deeper understanding. The auditor must remain objective, avoiding leading questions or expressing personal opinions. Documentation of responses should be factual and unbiased, focusing on what was said rather than interpreting it prematurely. The ultimate goal is to gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence to support the audit findings and conclusions, ensuring the audit effectively assesses the conformity and effectiveness of the information security management system. Question 29. During an internal audit of an organization's ISMs, a finding indicates that access control logs for a critical server were not reviewed monthly as required by the organization's documented procedure, a direct contravention of ISO 27001-2013 Annex A. 12.4.1. The root cause analysis reveals that the designated personnel responsible for this task were overloaded with other urgent operational duties and lacked clear prioritization guidelines for ISMs-related activities. The corrective action implemented involved reassigning the log review task to a different team member and updating the task description to include a higher priority level. Considering the principles of ISO 27001:2013, what is the primary objective that this corrective action must aim to achieve to be considered effective? Option A. Immediately restore the monthly review of access control logs and document the reassignment of duties for compliance reporting. Option B. Update the organization's documented procedure to reflect the new responsible team member and the revised priority level for log reviews. Option C. Identify and document the specific individuals responsible for the log review to facilitate future audits and accountability. Option D. Ensure the access control logs are reviewed consistently each month, and that the underlying cause of the previous oversight is eliminated to prevent recurrence. The correct answer is D. Ensure the access control logs are reviewed consistently each month, and that the underlying cause of the previous oversight is eliminated to prevent recurrence. Explanation. The core of managing nonconformities and implementing corrective actions within an ISO 27001:2013 framework is to prevent recurrence. Clause 10. 2. Nonconformity and corrective action mandates that when a nonconformity occurs, the organization must react to the nonconformity by taking action to control and correct it, and to deal with the consequences. Crucially, it also requires the organization to examine the need for action to eliminate the cause of the nonconformity so that it does not recur or occur elsewhere. This involves reviewing the nonconformity, determining its causes, implementing actions to eliminate the causes, and verifying that the corrective action taken is effective in preventing recurrence. The objective is to ensure the continued effectiveness of the Information Security Management System, ISMS. Therefore, the most critical aspect of a corrective action is its ability to demonstrably prevent the issue from happening again, thereby strengthening the ISMS. Question 30. An internal auditor is assessing the effectiveness of the implemented multi-factor authentication, MFA, for all remote access to the organization's sensitive customer data repository, a system subject to stringent data privacy regulations. The auditor's objective is to verify that the MFA control is functioning as designed and adequately mitigating the risk of unauthorized remote access. Which of the following audit activities would provide the most direct evidence of the MFA's ongoing operational effectiveness in preventing unauthorized access? Option A. Examining audit logs for failed login attempts from external IP addresses over the past quarter and correlating them with the MFA system's response. Option B. Interviewing the IT security manager to confirm their understanding of the organization's remote access policy and the role of MFA. Option C. Reviewing recent security awareness training records for all employees who access the repository remotely to confirm they understand MFA procedures. Option D. Verifying that the MFA solution is updated to the latest vendor-provided firmware version by checking the system's configuration settings. The correct answer is C. Reviewing recent security awareness training records for all employees who access the repository remotely to confirm they understand MFA procedures. Explanation. The effectiveness of an access control mechanism, such as a multi-factor authentication system for remote access, is determined by its ability to consistently prevent unauthorized access while allowing legitimate users to access resources. An internal auditor evaluating this effectiveness would look for evidence that the control is operating as intended and achieving its security objective. This involves examining logs for failed login attempts, reviewing the process for user onboarding and offboarding to ensure timely access revocation, and potentially conducting simulated attacks or penetration tests to gauge resilience. The auditor must also consider the context of relevant regulation, such as GDPR or HIPAA, which mandate specific data protection measures, including robust access controls. A control is considered effective if it demonstrably mitigates the identified risks to an acceptable level, as defined by the organization's risk treatment plan and security policies. This includes verifying that the control is implemented according to documented procedures, that users are trained on its proper use, and that it is regularly reviewed and updated to address evolving threats.